Okay, I think we should just get us going here and then folks can trickle in as they do. I'd like to say good morning and welcome to Managing Hybrid Teams. I am Michelle Leonard and I am the Outreach and Programs Manager with Commuter Services. And we are glad that you can join us today. Next slide, please.
Sorry about that. Give me a second. It's just taking its time, huh? Wow. So let me see what's going on. Sorry. That's weird. One second. Actually, we have so few people yet, so it's good to just wait a little, but let me just see. Okay, there we go. Sorry, Michelle.
No, that's all right. Today's presentation is part of the Twin Cities Telework webinar series. Managing Hybrid Teams is the sixth in our series. Twin Cities Telework by Commuter Services, it provides free telework resources to employers, managers, and teleworkers around the state of Minnesota. And you can watch this and previous webinars on our website, which is tctelework.com. Next slide, please. This is a sampling of the free resources that we carry for employers and managers and teleworkers on the tctelework.com website. We have sample telework and hybrid work policies and agreements. We have resources with practical mental health recommendations for teleworkers and hybrid workers, as well as an infographic with free mental health quick tips. And we have researched and compiled best tips and guidance for finding success in the telework and hybrid work arrangements for both teleworkers and the managers. And we are always developing new resources, so we encourage you to check back often. Next slide, please. This morning, we are recording today's presentation, and we will provide you with a link to a link to the webinar and a copy of the full slide deck within a week of the event. And we also will keep these available on our Commuter Services website and the Twin Cities Telework website. This webinar is going to cover a lot of territory over the next hour and a half or so. And so to streamline that process, we'd like to do the question and answer segment after the presentation. So please feel free to submit your questions using the Q&A tool on Zoom throughout the webinar, and we will catch up with them at the end. And if you have any questions after the fact, we have two options for you. Either you can sign into Twin Cities Telework, tctelework.com, and use our Ask an Expert tool, and we'll get back to you with an answer, or you can send a direct email to our Executive Director, Melissa Madison. And her email address is melissa@494quarter.org. Finally, all of the webinar participants will receive a short survey at the end of the presentation, and we would appreciate it if you could give us a little bit of feedback. And now to get us started, I am going to turn that over to Melissa, who will introduce our presenter. Next slide.
Thanks, Michelle. Well, I'll be introducing Elham. We've known Elham since 2007, and Elham is the principal of e-planning. She has more than 30 years experience developing telework, hybrid, and flexible schedule programs. She has created resource materials, conducted training, and worked with hundreds of employers and evaluated the impacts of telework and flexible scheduling on employers, employees, as well as trip reduction. Elham also chaired the National Telework Council for 15 years. She has advised the Congress and White House and many public entities in policy development. And we have had the pleasure of working with Elham for many years with numerous local companies. And I'd like to turn it over to you, Elham.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. And you can see me, correct?
Yes.
Okay, Wonderful. So it's a pleasure to be here with Commuter Services to talk about managing the teleworkers in this new hybrid environment. I'm really happy that I've been working with Melissa and her staff for a very long time. So I'm pretty familiar with the nuances of your territory. But however, a lot of things have changed since the pandemic, especially in regards to managing teleworkers and for teleworkers also to be efficient. So let's spend a little bit of time talking about planning the process. So I think one of the first things you want to do is make sure you have, as a manager, you have an understanding on what is okay with your organization. So please share the perspective the company has as to what is okay in terms of hybrid work. How many days is it okay to be, on the premises or at home, as well as some of the guidelines. And some people may have a fully remote program as well, which means some people will be completely remote or hybrid. Again, hybrid meaning a few days on site and a few days at home, probably at home. And this will not be probably like, traveling or anything like that. So the policy in terms of what is acceptable has to be fully communicated to all staff. And we'll talk a little bit more about policies and guidelines, but we want to make sure that everything's clear about the rules of engagement. Another top component for managers as you think about teleworking is first to assess the jobs that you manage as a manager and make sure that you have a list of jobs that can be handled remotely. It's best really to start with a list of jobs as opposed to just with individuals, because this makes it a much more equitable and transparent program. So first decide on the jobs, and also make sure that your approach is equitable, meaning that everybody in that particular job description can be a teleworker. So if someone's going to be denied teleworking, it has to be based on an assessment or on their previous performance. And make sure you have the right tools for teleworking. So let's keep going because we have a lot more to say. The hybrid workplace is going to be very interesting. And, it's not just shifting back to normal. I think that we all know that, what we had prior to the pandemic is not going to be what we have to respond to today. So we want to have a very intentional plan for responding to what can be remote or hybrid. And you need to, as leaders, think strategically about your remote work policies and practices. And we're going to keep going and give you more information. So first and foremost, the people who went home to work in March of 2020 are really not the same as those who are coming back in the office today. I think a lot has changed, and I'm sure you noticed that. So today's employees have great expectations for what they want out of flexibility and well-being, and have, they've been empowered, and some have become non-negotiable. So you really need to think through that. I mean, a lot of organizations are asking for the employees to come back, and it's not happening because the employees are saying, no, I'm not ready to come back full time. So this is a pendulum that we're all going to be confronting. So there are some variations of this hybrid model. And one option, obviously, I think these are, of course, some gross differentiations, but one option is to go remote first, which means that your organization will be remote with a few exceptions, and your offices will be a space for your employees to work from when they need it. But the second one is probably the most popular, which is office occasional, which means the office is there and employees come into the office a few times a week. And depending on what your company needs, this can be loose or it can be very structured. Some employers are being very strict and saying 3 days back, but then again, they can't enforce it. So if you want 3 days back or you want 2 days back in the office, you have to be, again, intentional. So the key is offer as much flexibility as you can, because a lot of employees need that today and are asking for it. But in terms of the hybrid workplace, I think what we want to point out is only 1 in 10 organizations have begun communicating and piloting their vision. A lot of you probably, after Labor Day, had expectations, and hopefully you started, putting some models in place. But a lot of times employers have not been very strict about what they are going to expect. So if you're ready, you have to communicate it. Obviously, in today's world, equity, inclusion, and diversity are key items. And so in order to make sure that we are abiding by all of that, you need to, first of all, ensure that you have a list of job descriptions that are amenable to teleworking and hybrid work. And it's really essential that you have that list, because that will help you balance employees' expectations. So once you have a list, it says, okay, these are the jobs where people can be candidates for remote work. And of course, that would be coupled with a job performance if it is available. And, if the job performance had not been up to par, then maybe you cannot, have that employee being remote. Now, be fair in assessing employees based on, their prior performance, if it exists. And if you're going to deny an employee the opportunity to be a hybrid worker, please make sure that this is carefully written, documented, and communicated. We have not yet seen litigious cases about people who have been told they can't telework, although their job description is amenable. But we're just at the beginning of all this. So make sure that your organization does not fall prey to that. And so be open also to employee feedback. A lot of times employees are not happy because they're not getting the right feedback. And so you want to make sure that employees know why they are being rejected a chance to work remotely. And if it's something that can be changed, then you talk about it. So the environment you're striving for is obviously something that's about collaboration and information exchange. Make sure you are consulting your HR department on diversity policies. And by the way, a lot of the data shows that minorities, especially women minorities, are really at the top of the helm in terms of demanding some of this flexibility. Just a quote from Microsoft. At Microsoft, we're embracing flexibility as a principle to give our employees around the world greater choice in when, where, and how they work. And I'm not going to read this whole thing to you, but basically what Microsoft is saying, that they allow an employee to be flexible for 50% of the time. And sometimes that is not just the work location, meaning the home or the office, but it's also the schedule during which they're working. So I think this is a great way to, kind of get into this journey. And you see that sign on someone's desk saying, yes, I'm working, but from home, which means that that employee can be contacted, but they're just not physically there. Okay. It's essential that you have a policy. And luckily, through my partnership with Commuter Services, we have a lot of templates that can help you develop a policy or guidelines. And what a policy typically includes is the purpose of the program and the eligibility requirements, the location, as well as identifying schedules and hours and making sure that the workspace is a designated workspace and has been configured safely. And obviously, there's a lot more that goes into that policy. And by asking Commuter Services for a sample policy or for guidelines, you can definitely gain access to what is available in terms of a template. And of course, as you can see going down the list, there's security, liability, the process, income tax, and evaluation. And along with the policy, a lot of times there's an agreement which really tailors the arrangement to the individual employee, meaning in terms of where the work will be done, what are the dates when it won't be done remotely, their assignments, access and availability, the ergonomics, and some additional conditions. Typically, an agreement is signed by the employee and their manager. And this really starts the process, saying that we all agree and abide with the rules that are included in the policy. Okay, we're going to now switch gears a little bit. Excuse me while I have a sip of water. And talk about some of the essentials about managing a hybrid team. Some of the terminology that has come out of us doing this is that we need to be deliberate about what is synchronous versus asynchronous time. And what I mean by that, synchronous is when we do stuff together, when we have meetings, when we're sharing information. Asynchronous is when we have alone time and we can work on projects, and other information. Very important that as a manager, you allow for both of these, types of communication for your employees. Some organizations actually have designated days as asynchronous, so that means that the employee will be just doing project work, and they can be interrupted, but it has to be, specifically about the project, as opposed to synchronous, which means we're going to meetings. The worst thing we can do is bring people into the office just for them to be on Zoom meetings all day. And that's something that can also be done from home. So please think through as you assign projects and time schedules to your staff. So going a little bit further with asynchronous and synchronous, I really want us to think about this very seriously. I'm sure you've had employees who have gone home and they've been exhausted from going to meeting. That is not a great way to use your staff. But the thing to follow is that with asynchronous communication, meaning that when you're not together all the time, you want to always over communicate with context. By the way, if you're going to have a meeting and there'll be a PowerPoint presentation, maybe you want to share that with the employees ahead of time so they can take their time to go over it and understand what it says and then ask you questions. You also do really want to reduce the length of meetings and eliminate unnecessary ones. If a meeting's an hour long, maybe it's too long. Maybe, make sure that you end it in 45 minutes, so giving your staff 15 minutes time back. Sometimes we take half an hour for a meeting, but really it can be done in 15. So keep thinking about how you can shorten the time that's spent in meetings. You want to have agendas beforehand and make sure that you ask for availability before scheduling anything as a manager. Record the meetings and document work, and make sure that you're communicating, what the objectives have been. Also, don't be shy about asking people to be with camera on. A lot of times people come to meetings and they're just multitasking and doing a lot of stuff. But if you want them all to be present, you just have to ask it and say, I want everybody to be camera on for this meeting and engage. So mentoring in a virtual environment is also very important. A lot of organizations worry about this. I've worked with a lot of engineering and architecture firms, which always say that, one of the best things we do is bring, some of the more recent staff into the office and then work with them. So they are mentored with, seniors who are also part of the organization. There's nothing which says that virtual work diminishes from mentoring. So you want to make sure that, first of all, if you're bringing more junior staff into the office, For the purposes of mentoring, managers and leaders are there to help him. And this typically falls into 4 different categories. One is to build trust. Trust is essential in any environment, virtual or not. And you want to be very clear about what the rules of engagement are, meaning, okay, if you're going to be working from home, what are your expectations? And what are the expectations regarding accessibility? Also, be very intentional when you're forming that mentoring relationship. It cannot be just left up to, the grayscale. It has to really be chipped in cement. And make sure that you're establishing boundaries as to what is acceptable and not acceptable. The honesty is the best way to proceed with this. Please do not leave anything in the gray. So to help you with some of these processes, Commuter Services also provides some sample selection surveys for managers and also employee self-assessment surveys. In some of your contexts, this may not be necessary, but in an environment where you want everything to be formal and documented, you may want to actually use a survey process. So these are available for you. Please do contact Melissa at the end of this session. Let's talk a little bit about recruitment and retention. These are critical words that have come into play in today's market. And from the first days of the pandemic, one of the things we've noticed is that a lot of people are job skipping, and that actually they're finding an easier way to leave jobs. And as a result, we have high levels of people who are going to new jobs and low levels of retention. Okay, so let's talk about this a little bit. Based on Gartner Group, the pace of employee turnover is about 50 to 75% higher than before. I can tell you from my own experience that what we're seeing is about 40% of the employees during any given month are ready to change jobs. So managers need help with 3 things. One of them is, first, make sure you're having career conversations with your employees based on not only promotion to progression, but also how your employees can develop. Employees are really looking for chances to be better. And please create a culture and structure that supports, their careers. And I'm a firm believer that culture is not a place, but it's really a sense of belonging. And managers also need to be rewarded, not only for retaining people, but also retaining people across the entire organization. This retention issue is huge as your managers and you're going into it. So why are employees leaving? First of all, because they can. The cost of switching jobs has been significantly less, and also because employees are leaving voluntarily because they're also feeling that they're not being appreciated. A lot of employees say that we're not being heard. And so this is something important for you to think about. And coupled with that is a lack of career advancement. Another thing that we've seen, really, kind of highlight what our experience is that a lot of employees are burnt out because they're exhausted. And companies, a lot of companies have put a freeze on hiring, which means that the people who are in the organization are actually being burdened with a lot more responsibilities than before. So please think through this. It's not only about the pandemic, but also about, what's happening in the job environment. And especially with the looming recession, which we don't know if it's going to happen or not, this is even becoming more acute. So here's a chart just to describe, based on McKinsey, as to why people are leaving. So I just want to, highlight some of the key points. Top reasons: uncaring leaders, unsustainable work performance and expectations, and lack of career development. Okay. And then you can see, lack of workplace flexibility and all that stuff later to come into bear. But basically, employees don't feel they're being listened to. And a lot of literature has pointed out the fact that during, as a result of the pandemic, a lot of employees have been empowered. In fact, we have more union activities in this country than ever before. And according to the Gartner Group, 71% of Americans are supporting unions these days, which is a huge change. So let's go to the next one. Sorry. And then coupled with that, I'm so sorry. Why are some employees returning? Because some employees leave their jobs and then they come back. It's a boomerang effect. So they come back, number one, because of workplace flexibility. Please, if this is a key word for you to remember, flexibility is it. Everybody wants flexibility in terms of location, in terms of hours, and other work issues. And they also want a better compensation package. So that's bringing them back, as well as sustainable, performance measures. So, and you can see there are other reasons, but those are the top three. So what to do? What can companies do? Because they cannot justify these big moves, for the long term. So it's best to take a different approach. First of all, revise your compensation and benefits. Maybe you can have a more competitive program in terms of what can be accomplished and what is possible. And then also make the workplace deliverable. If you want people to come back in the office, you have to make investments in having a workplace that really listens to employees and addresses their concerns and also fosters a sense of community. So these are some changes that we all need to make. A few more tips for managers: have a sense of purpose, make the office somewhere that the employees want to be. Just asking them to come back is not going to be sufficient. So you want to make sure the office is attractive. Some employers even pay for lunches on the days that they expect employees to come back. Make sure that you have very clear expectations, which means that schedules, communication, all of that is spelled out. And you have to be very clear about not only what is the work that has to be done, but also feedback, coaching, and all of what we usually would do in a well-structured work environment, which would now be maybe remote. Make sure you're providing autonomy for your employees who are well-skilled. It's really important that you set them up for success. Who doesn't like autonomy? Everybody does, for the most part. So make sure that you're sharing that with your employees, and also make sure that they're building relationships so that they can be successful in a team environment. So let's go ahead and talk a little bit about some other components. Onboarding is not about, it's not the same as orientation. So in this environment that we are navigating, you want to make sure that you have a strong onboarding process in place, and which means you have a strong email, including the first day of work and the schedule. And some employees have, by the way, been hired with no experience, but they've been hired and they don't know who's who and what the company really is about. So you want to make sure that they have necessary documents and also get acquainted with the company culture. The information needs to be very as employees are onboarding. You know what? And it's so easy in this virtual world to just get 15 minutes with the CEO, 15 minutes with the CFO, and open those doors for your employees as they're getting to learn about your company. Make sure that you explain the company culture and have clear expectation about everything from upcoming projects and values, team objectives, and individual goals. The more clarity you have, the better you will be at succeeding in this hybrid environment. Let's talk a little bit about training also, because training is essential. Just because we told people to go home doesn't mean that, okay, they're ready to do what is required. there really has to be a point of departure. If you haven't had it yet, make sure that you build in a process that can help make that easier. What I mean by that is, even if people have been teleworking for a while, bring them back, find out what's working and what's not working, or just go over some of the basics that they may have forgotten. And one of the things we've realized about manager skills is that a lot of the skills that we require of managers have changed. And some of this is the requirement of kindness and empathy, not only about the pandemic, but also about the life of an employee, because all of a sudden everybody's realized that their life matters. So I'm not saying that you should be, involved in your employees day to day, but just make sure that you know about their boundaries, and, if they don't look good, they don't look happy, you're asking the right questions. And you want to be optimistic and have patience. So some of the other things that we've seen with managers is that you have to be resilient, and you want to decrease burnout. Burnout is unfortunately one of the biggest, I would say, unwanted side effects. And it's not just about people who are working at home, it's generally about the work environment. So be positive, make sure that your employees trust you. They can talk to you. They can, there's a back and forth, and you listen to them. And also, let's make sure that there's room for innovation. And obviously, every organization has some guidelines on mental health and services. So we want to, ensure that those kinds of milestones are available. Now, in terms of a teleworker training, obviously, you want to set the parameters. This is very important. What is this program about? What are some logical parameters that we have to follow? How many days in the office? What does that day mean? How do the employees need to be accessible? To what degree? And that employees are organized, and that, they are scheduling teleworking days based on what would make sense, as opposed to just what the demands are. And at the same time, we want them to have an ergonomic office at home, which really means that they have a designated space. Working in the kitchen does not work, obviously on a permanent basis, unless the employee's alone, and it doesn't matter. But a lot of times we do recommend that people have a designated workspace, and that it has been configured to allow for safety of the employee who is doing their work at home. We also want to make sure that employees are training their family and others. I'm home, but I am working. I'm not here to run errands. I'm not here to cook, and they're setting boundaries. We also want to make sure that employees are engaged, just having meetings and watching people join, and then no one asks the question, no one's involved, is a really bad sign. We have to find ways to keep employees engaged, if it's virtual or hybrid. And I really want you to think about that a little bit more, especially if people are more out of the office than in the office. How do we keep those employees, feeling good about belonging to our culture? Obviously, safety is important when people work at home. And we also, through the multiple services of commuter services, have a lot of guidelines on safety. Technology should be your best friend. You want to make sure employees know everything about it, everything about maybe using Office, Microsoft, and all the platforms' capabilities. And sometimes it's not bad to just resolve concerns about what is going on. So maybe you're having a meeting with your teleworker, say, okay, what's come up? How can we help you? And help, make sure that they're involved in that conversation. So, of course, the manager training, and this is part of it, is that we want to make sure that the managers know that they have control of the program. So part of this, very essentially, is to assess jobs, of course, like we talked about, and also make sure that the individuals in those jobs can be remote. And also, don't make teleworking a right. It is not a perk. It is not a benefit. It is a management prerogative and it's a workplace strategy. These are very important points. So please make sure you're using the right language. And then as a manager, set objectives and, make sure that everything has deadlines and you're giving feedback. At the same time, determine what's the frequency that people can be remote and determining what communication needs there are. So if an employee just thinks that, okay, I'm going to be asynchronous today, work by myself, what does that mean? Can they not be interrupted? I don't think so. I think at any moment, a manager can actually reach their employee. Team dynamics are critical to think about. Obviously, technology issues, we hope they're all resolved by now, but technology is always evolving. So make sure that your employees are well-trained and they know how to, confront a lot of those issues. Collaboration, very critical. If you're going to bring people in, have a reason. So part of that is collaboration. And at the same time, as managers, you want to be active about resolving problems. So once again, please do go back to commuter services for a lot of uses, including the policy, the application, a discussion before people are teleworking, and an agreement, and then also home office requirements in terms of ergonomics. This is something that a lot of employers just don't consider, but it is important because when an employee works at home, they are covered by workers' comp when they are in their designated workspace and during the agreed upon work hours while doing company work. But that has to be clear. Okay, so let's talk about also setting up the home office. Once again, there are resources available from commuter services. And it's really good to think about that chair, about that desk, not glass, but a surface, lighting, all those things that go into a home office. So a little bit about communication. There's a lot about communication that is critical. Obviously, one side of it is all about the tools and what's available. And I know that you know this, but very, very critical but simple to the process is your Outlook, is your employee's Outlook calendar, or whatever that shared calendar looks like, because it should indicate availability. It should include issues about meetings that are probably with clients or outside stakeholders. And yes, that calendar it really sets up the tone for communication. So employees need to comply with it, and they need to make sure that everything is current. In our world today, Zoom, meetings, Teams, all of that has evolved how we do work. But let's not abuse those tools and use them when it's efficient. A lot of times we just get everybody into Zoom and not much is accomplished because there's one person talking, no questions asked, and that is not an efficient way to use it. Or even Teams. I mean, they're both very similar. Also have some, guidelines about emails, text, chat. First of all, what platforms are okay to use? You don't want to have, a dozen of different types of, functionalities that people can use. Make it simple. Make it simple as to what that entails. And I can't emphasize, overemphasize the training aspect on all of these tools. A lot of times we have them, people don't know how to use them. Now, so that's the tool side, but we also need communication guidelines. So what is expected in terms of availability and accessibility? We have to be very critical about that and say, okay, as an employee, if you're working remotely, we expect you to check emails this many times a day, voicemail this many times a day. Please, if you have employees that tend to not do that, you really need to be strict about it and enforce it. As I mentioned before, excuse me, you want to be also very comprehensive about what is synchronous versus asynchronous time. As I mentioned before, some companies have days that are totally asynchronous. I met somebody from, Salesforce recently, who told me that their organization is very strict about it in terms of, okay, these are asynchronous days, these are synchronous days. So on a synchronous day, everybody has to be available. On an asynchronous day doesn't mean that they don't have to be available, but it means they're doing project work. So we have to be respectful. There needs definitely to be clarity on camera and ready visibility. I think you all know how awful it is to have a meeting where you see nothing and you don't see how employees are reacting. So as a manager, be firm about it. Also, as I mentioned before, be very clear about meeting duration and agendas and respect those. Okay, let's keep going. So some issues just to enforce with teleworkers as managers: accessibility, contact numbers, where can we reach them, how can we reach them, what is communication within reason. So what makes sense? Is it within 20 minutes they return a call, within 40 minutes? Be very clear about it. That calendar is critical, as I mentioned, because it not only says what the employee is doing, but it also gives the rest of your team an idea of what may be available in terms of collaboration. And have your employees be very clear about what's work and meetings. So all of that stuff is documented, but also if there is personal non-available time that they have discussed with you ahead of time, they have to go to to a doctor, that is indicated on their calendar, so everyone knows that they can't be contacted then. And of course the work hours are critical. Make sure that employees know what are the core hours and the company hours during which they should be available. Now, sometimes managers have shifted that by providing more flexibility, but a lot of times that is not that flexible. So communication, I know everybody worries about brainstorming. Why do we have to be together to brainstorm? I still don't know. We can be very innovative and have virtual brainstorming. But also remember, FaceTime is important. So make the time to either have a video chat with your employees or just to see them in person to gauge what's going on. Sometimes the phone is the best instrument, and we've all forgotten about the phone. Actually, when we call people, they're offended. They're like, why are you calling me? But I think we need to normalize having the phone back. So some challenges and solutions in case you have some coworker resentment, meaning that some employees can be hybrid and some can't. You really want to manage that, meaning that you should have other solutions in your bag for those employees. So if they can't be hybrid, can they be on flex time? Can they have a compressed work week? Can they be on a ride sharing program that helps them? Please, make sure that employees know about other programs that can help them while some employees are remote and or hybrid. The other issue is I want you to pay attention to this term, purposeful presence, which means that when people are in the office, you really need to plan that time. As I mentioned before, bringing employees in to be on a Zoom meeting all day is not a good reason. So make sure you have interactions, teamwork, and all of that for those days. Some other challenges, having difficult conversations, that's really not just part of what we're experiencing with hybrid. It's just part of everyday work, but managers have to be direct. And employees should always know about their performance, and it shouldn't come as a shock. And if there's staff issues, what you want to also do is involve them in creating a solution. If you have employees who have been asked to come into the office and they're not, make sure that the employee understands the need for accountability and that you have to have a way to measure how attendance is being documented. So you can't just have a program without telling people how we are going to know if they're coming in or not. So, have a way that you can document that and talk to the employees if they're not coming in as often as you want and find out what's preventing them. Some employees will be disengaged, like we talked about. And obviously, meaning that they check out, they're just, they're really not involved because whether they're remote or in the office. So make sure that you, again, ask for camera ready. Please ask questions during meeting, wake people up and maybe have some fun activities and just make that engagement more enticing. I don't think a one-way conversation is the way to get it. So maybe you can think about how you can switch it up. So some of the other points about handling communication or, some of the coming back to the office challenges. If you are having challenges, please document the problem and also talk to the employee if they're not showing up as required, because you want to know why. First, before you do anything, you have to talk to the employee, find out why they're not showing up. And I would say on a very parallel wrap with that is that you have to have a written policy and guidelines which say what our expectations are, okay? So without that, you can't enforce it. Also, make sure you have a meeting and communication etiquette checklist. Again, this is something that you can ask for help with from commuter services. And if the employee is not being compliant, please talk to them again. First, find out why they're not doing this, but also have, the facts before you. You didn't answer these communications. The phone was ringing, but, you were not available. We asked you to come in 2 days, but you didn't come. So there has to be some transparency. So for managers to be successful, again, we have tips for managers and for teleworkers through commuter services. Make sure you have attainable goals and expectations. Again, don't overload your employees. Make sure you have communication goals and, universal procedures. Be patient. And, trust is what this whole world of hybrid is built on. If you don't trust someone who's, going home to work, you probably don't trust them in the office either. I mean, just having people come in doesn't mean that they're doing their job. Okay, so we're going to switch gears a little bit and talk about productivity. I'm going to ask Kate to just tell me, how are we doing on time? I guess.
Hi, Elham.
Hi.
We are at, we're at 20 minutes after 12. So we have about 40 minutes left.
Okay, so we're doing well. I should wrap up about in 15 minutes or something. So productivity, obviously a very critical issue in this dynamic. I mean, the whole question is about productivity, right? Are they productive? Are they doing their work? As managers, please set up your employees for success, which means be realistic about what's attainable. Make sure you have milestones so you can go back and check with them, have deadlines. So if it's a week, if it's 2 weeks, and it should really be, those smaller deadlines and milestones. Make sure that you're going back, you're following up. If the work isn't getting done, you have to be, coaching the employees and helping them and communicate with them about, okay, so why is it that we're not doing this? And also document it. But by the way, the picture here is beautiful because you can see an employee that is saying, hurrah, I got so much done at home. A lot of times that is the case. If you are not getting productivity out of an employee, then maybe they shouldn't be working remotely. So there should always be a feedback loop for group and for the individual. So productivity, this is the biggest question. And I really want to show this survey from 2014 because it's almost a decade old. But I want to show you that even then, the top issues about productivity are responsiveness of employee, how quickly they respond, specific goals and parameters, honor system, and then very low on this list is organization monitors employees via software. I'm very sad to hear that a lot of organizations are implementing software to see how many keystrokes people are, typing and, some kind of, I would say silly measures, because you can bang on, your keyboard, but not get a lot done. I think that what we need for productivity is a very good direct conversation about the work objectives, the deliverables, and the timelines. And that really should should be part of the feedback, kind of a process. So this is a very simple chart. Please help your employees to, organize their work and have them or you define objectives and deliverables with timeframes. And then, maybe they can send an outline saying, here's what I'm agreeing to do, for this week or for the next 2 weeks. Make sure that you are reviewing the status of what is in that email or in that communication periodically. You want to coach employees how to do better and repeat this process. Evaluation is no longer once a year kind of a process, it's ongoing. And to help you with that, again, you don't have to use this, but Commuter Services offers a work log. So very simply, employee can say what their objectives are, what the tasks or work delivered is, and whether they met it or not. And then, this is a very simplistic form. You don't have to use it, but something like this would be lovely. We asked managers in the hybrid environment, what would help improve your skills? So here's some of the results: tools and technology for collaboration. I know that Teams and Zoom and all of them are still evolving. So make sure that you get the right training from your IT group. Also, make sure you have an understanding about how to manage employees with different working styles. This is where HR has to weigh in. So some employees, you can coach, some employees you can delegate. So all of that has to be very clear. And there should be direction from leadership on what's expected. And manager trainings are something that some managers require. Okay, so let's keep moving on. And in another survey by HubSpot, they asked, what are some skills that are important to you as a manager? As you can see, inclusive leadership, being a clear communicator, leading with empathy. This is critical. And then understanding of diversity, inclusion, and belonging. I think we all need training in all those areas. A lot of managers that were surveyed in this HubSpot survey, 44% said that the managers believe they have a right tools for being effective, but 31% are still uncertain. So that we need to retool. And also 23% of flex workers or hybrid workers describe management of remote employees as the biggest challenge of working with a hybrid team. So I think we have a lot to work at. Hopefully this training is going to go a long way. Now, we have to divert to something else that is very critical, which is culture and employee engagement. A lot of people are worried about culture and how employees' sense of belonging may be deteriorating because they're remote sometimes. I want to go back to saying that culture is not about a place. It's really about a process. And sometimes the best way to make sure that the culture is in place is when leaders are present and accessible. So they're sending memos, they're sending emails to staff, and that they are also closely related to visibility and accessibility, so that the way is open for employees to actually communicate just from where they are up and also down. The new organization requires a lot of communication. So leaders can build strong cultures by creating places where people want to be. Just by asking people to come back, they won't. You do need to make the office a little bit more enticing. So office should be about a place that offers spaces to collaborate, focus, learn, socialize, and rejuvenate. And I'll go a little bit more in detail. So as far as culture, you want to make sure that you're using culture to enable hybrid work. Make sure that as managers, you're empowered to lead this shift. really, you are, I mean, you are the guiding light for this whole process. Rebuild social capital in a hybrid work, which means social capital really means who do we know in an organization. So make sure that employees really have a good wide reach to who does what, and make sure people are focused on culture for attracting and retaining talent. And we have to combat digital exhaustion, but we're going to go to that. So design your space not only for people who are in the room, but also for people who are not. And we're going to talk about that a little bit more, but technology, please enforce using collaborative tools. And somebody who doesn't use them is not going to be part of this. Okay, so social capital, as I mentioned, has to do with resources and opportunities you have access to because of who you know. Your employees should really have this information. And new team members need to feel that they're part of this and that they can access anyone in the organization. So have teams and make sure that your teams are effective. So today, to be effective, we need to embrace intentionality and the willingness to learn new set of skills, including the ability to prioritize and rally our teams around impact rather than activity. It's really about what's getting done and no longer about presence. So what would you like to see your company invest to foster a strong culture? This is a survey by HubSpot again. And obviously engagement and team building events are at the top. Communication and collaboration tools are also up there, as well as management training. And you can see some of the other categories. So we also want to remind you that there are ways for you to connect your employees on a hybrid team. And once again, please do go back to commuter services for some of those guidelines. And addressing the FOMO, which is really fear of missing out. We also have a resource at commuter services, but employees are worrying about having missing out if they're not there. So make sure communication is transparent. Make sure that there's growth in training, and there might be some rewards or recognitions for employees who are both on-site and also remote. Recognize employees, please. Okay, so let's talk briefly about burnout. Oh my God, what a beautiful picture, right? Some employees just feel like that. And this has been its own epidemic. And some employees are actually going to quiet quitting, which means that they just do the minimum to get by and that they can meet their performance, but it's, they're not doing anything above, which means that they are burnt out and they're just, trying to get by. So employee burnout, some of the major causes: unsustainable work load. I'm laughing at the picture. Then, perceived lack of autonomy, insufficient recognition. Please bring back those recognition programs you had. And then relationships, also lack of fairness, just being, invisible. Nobody wants to feel that, or they're mismatched. But overall, the employees are feeling very burdened. And so what can we do to help it? Allow for some flexible time off. As we can see, is high on that list. People don't take time off, but they should. Also make sure you have mental health resources and clarity around what can be done, on a hybrid schedule, and so that the employees don't feel like they don't have the information. Excuse me. And we want to make sure that managers are always trained. So if you don't feel like you're getting training, please talk to your HR department. So to combat this, we want to reduce the risk. We want to make sure there's quiet time, make sure that employees get that asynchronous time so that they can work on their projects. Also encourage people to take breaks, please. I mean, I know sometimes companies are like, no, they don't need a break. They do. They really do need a break. And make sure that meetings have a purpose. Don't increase meetings. I think we meet too much as it is. So, have an agenda, make sure it's purposeful and don't go, overtime. Okay. So, a lot of employees, are really concerned about wellness and mental health now. So we want to make sure that they're recovering from stress. And, there's some strategies that help that. And some of them are detaching psychologically from work. Make sure they're getting that time off. Or, when the day is done, they're not just staying in the, on their computer and working. Make sure they're micro breaks during the workday. They could be collaborative. It could just be, a team building time. Make sure your employees are using their vacation time. And, just prioritize activities about recovery. And, you want to make sure that your environment is also conducive to that. Bringing people back to a really boring office is not the way to do it. So mental health, treat at-home work days like on-site work days, for employees, get up, get ready, take breaks, eat lunch, get away from the computer and have a healthy lifestyle. These are just some of the tips in a nutshell. Let's talk about the workspace. I know we're getting to the end. Sorry if this is a little too long, but what we have noticed is that a lot of employees say their biggest challenge is knowing when and why to come into the office. And I think as leaders, you need to rethink the role of office space and having intentionality around who, where, and why of in-person gatherings. So new cultural norms should be developed to make sure that the office is additive. A lot of companies are reconfiguring their space so that there's more meeting space, there's more, kind of a relaxed coffee shop type of an environment, as opposed to just, desks that people work at. And what we've also seen is that people really value still privacy when they come back to the office. So very important to all this process is evaluation. We really do need to have feedback mechanisms with our staff. And some ways to do that, obviously, are focus groups, getting together with employees or managers separately, finding out what's going on, what the issues are. Doing individual interviews is another one. And surveys, of course, is a favorite. But please don't collect data that you cannot give back, meaning that don't collect data too fast. And if you want to do a survey, be, again, very intentional about what you're collecting. Just a few considerations about the future of workplace strategies. I think we're going to be at the helm of these recruitment and retention issues for a while, but the pendulum seems to be settling either in a 3 to 2 day work in the office versus at home. And a lot of companies are having a hard time getting people back 3 days. Your company has to set the culture and the expectation. This new era will be flexible, not only in terms of work location, but also hours. I think hours are going to be kind of the next frontier. And, employers with rigid rules like Tesla, oh my God, Elon Musk asked everybody to come back. And he said they would be fired if they didn't. Then he found out that they didn't even have enough desks or parking space for all the employees that they had, added. So that was not a rigid rule that could be enforced. We also are looking in changes in home office design. And I want to tell you, I know this sounds crazy, but the 32-hour work week has become very successful in European countries. I have a feeling we're going to see some of that, which means a 4-day work week, 32 hours, same pay. So I hope you have found this training useful. And at this point, I'm going to pass it back on to Michelle to talk about some data.
Wonderful. Thank you, Ilham. It is a lot of information, isn't it?
I know.
It's a lot. And, we're going to open up questions for Ilham in a moment. But first of all, I'd like to talk to you briefly about what happens on the days when your hybrid employees are not working from home. And I think everybody can recognize this kind of a photo. We at Twin Cities Telework by Commuter Services like to say that the best commute is no commute. However, commuter traffic in our region has increased dramatically over the past few months as more people have gone to the work site. And I suspect that if you're in greater Minnesota or elsewhere in the Twin Cities, you've probably seen something similar to this. So this slide here is kind of telling to us at Commuter Services. We've conducted some commuter surveys every few months over the past 2 years. And out of our last 3 surveys, we had asked the question of what employees thought their long-term work arrangement would be. And consistently, 52%, I don't know how that happened, but over half of our respondents said that they expected to have a hybrid arrangement. But the only thing is that traveling has changed for many people since March 2020. Now, hybrid schedules do vary. So maybe a carpool that used to be an option isn't working anymore, or they've maybe taken bus transit and those routes haven't returned yet. So all of these things are kind of trickling down onto our roadways. And so as employers start to think about what the return to work is looking like for the people who aren't working from home full time, we want to just talk about a couple strategies to consider. Elham, could you forward, please? Next slide.
Just give me a second. I don't know why the computer is not cooperating, but let's keep going. Okay, let's see what happens. Is that it? No.
Not quite.
I know, this is so bizarre. Well, you know how it is. Technology is perfect until it doesn't work. Okay, here we go.
Perfect. Thank you.
Sure.
Okay, so Commuter Services offers a number of programs and resources to assist employers and commuters and residents. And if you'd like to learn about sustainable commute options in your region, please let us know and we'll be happy to help you find someone that can assist you with that information. For an example, though, I wanted to just share a couple of the strategies that we use. One of the biggest ones, of course, is Metro Pass, which is a deeply discounted bus pass program that is only available for participating employers. There is a preferred parking as a valued benefit, and we help employers set that sort of a program up. There are bike loaner programs that, especially with e-bikes gaining momentum, these help, besides the health benefits, the programs help make bike commuting feasible for folks who live a little bit farther away. And then fun incentive programs encourage commuters to try sustainable commuting. Commuter Services offers try it promotions, or you can initiate your own company challenge and offer prizes or even just bragging rights. And communicating regularly with your employers and employees about the commute programs and services is always a good idea. And we at Commuter Services, we offer customized communication to assist you in that. And so I would say, let's move on to the next slide, please. And I'm going to turn this back over to Melissa, who will assist us with the questions. Thank you.
Just give me a second. I don't know why this is not going, but I'm going to try. Okay.
Here we go.
Here we go. Sorry.
Thanks, Michelle and Elham. Okay, well, we have a great question that came in. And before I read it to you, I'd like to encourage anyone who has a question and you have not yet submitted it, there's time to do that. And then you can have it addressed right now by Elham. Or if you think of your question after the webinar, please feel free to email it to us. And our email addresses are going to be up on the screen after the Q&A. So the question is, what do you do if you can tell that an employee is burnt out, but they don't recognize it, or that they'll just respond that they're fine when the manager asks how they're doing?
Oh my God, that's a hard one, right? Because people try to avoid, some of those difficult episodes in their own lives, and it's probably how they deal with life anyways. I still think that you should document as a manager, you should write down why you feel they're burnt out. So it can't be just, okay, come in my office and I think you're burned out. No, you should assess why are the reasons are, what are the reasons for which you think they are. So, tie it to productivity, tie it to them not being engaged during meetings, tie it to them not participating, and then say, okay, what's going on? But you need to have your facts when you address that, but also be very empathetic and find out what's going on. And maybe that work's not the cause, but home is. It could be that work is the cause. We don't know. But, before you assume anything, ask questions. I always tell my friends who are managers that this is something they should do. Don't assume, because when you assume, that's really a wrong direction. You should first ask a lot of questions, talk to people, and find out what's going on with that. So I would say that please, again, document the facts, but also talk with them and find out, what's going on. I wish I had better advice, but I'm sure that you also have, some guidance from your HR group in terms of, some, counseling and all of that might be available to your employees privately as opposed to publicly.
Very good response and ideas. And I would add to that we could encourage our employees to take their vacations. So I know you touched on that. So taking vacations and unplugging is so important to have balance and good mental health. And so I wonder if that could even be required. I know for our staff, I've given our staff mental health days in addition to the normal amount of vacation and the accrual. So that's, we've been doing that for several years now since the pandemic because we do need extra time. Great question. And so Elham, another question about quiet quitting and quiet firing. So those are words that we're starting to hear more often. I think that they're addressing conditions that have been in place. But, quiet quitting has been something that people have done for a long time. And it's, I've seen it both described as when employees do the least amount possible to keep their job. And I've also heard it described as only doing the bare minimum or doing just what's asked of them, nothing extra.
Yeah.
So kind of on a continuum there, but do you have thoughts on quiet quitting and quiet firing guidance that you could
Yes.
give?
I think that's a way for people to be checking out. We don't have to create terms to describe these kind of situations. We've all seen it in our personal relations. So, work is another manifestation of all of that. So if an employee feels that they're not being rewarded, they're not being recognized, they've tried, they don't have a voice, they can't be heard, obviously they're going to feel disenchanted and their morale is going to suffer from all of this. So I think it's really imperative that as managers, you nip it in the bud, talk to them and, find out what their issues are. In fact, if you have been, the culprit of not doing a lot of those things, you should, I think, stop the way you're managing. People feel neglected. If you're neglecting employees, they are going to find some, ways to really lax off doing work. I think it all comes back to a good manager and a good employee, but we need to be stronger managers and we need to be more caring about our employees because employees do care about how they're treated. They really do. It's not just a job. It's a big part of their life.
Right.
So,
yes. So another question is about to formalize or not with regard to a telework or a hybrid policy. So we know some companies have a telework policy, and before the pandemic, it was actually more common for companies to not have one and just allow the supervisors to have individual arrangements with employees. So what are your thoughts on to formalize or not?
Of course, you should formalize. Of course, the rules of engagement have to be clear in terms of, what the employees are supposed to do. You should have a policy. Now, policies can be flexible. They don't have to be rigid. Once again, please do depend on commuter services to help you foster that policy. Just because there's a template, you don't have to be, using all the elements in there. But it's really worse when you don't allow people to know what is this program about? How are they being judged? How are they going to be placed in it? Please take the guesswork out of it. The problem is when managers act, without a policy. The policy sets the standard. So please do formalize, and you have plenty of help to do that.
Yes, definitely. Okay, well, I haven't seen any additional questions come in. And so could you, Elham, advance us to our next slide, which is contact information for how to get in touch with
Sorry.
commuter
Sorry.
services. Thank you. That's perfect.
Sure.
So we'll pause on this slide. And as Michelle had said at the beginning of our webinar, we will be sending everyone who registered for the webinar a copy of the slides and a link to the webinar. And so you can share that with others on your staff if you wish. And if you think of a question after the webinar is done, you may submit that at any time, of course, to myself or Kate. And there's also an Ask the Expert feature on the Twin Cities Telework website, which is tctelework.com. And thank you, Elham, for the presentation that you've given today and your guidance. Thank you, everyone who has attended. We appreciate you and have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you all.